Hey friends, welcome back to the Pulpit to Pew podcast. It has been a few weeks since I've posted anything, so we've got 3 lessons in our Beatitudes series, and I haven't posted any of them yet, so I'm at least going to try to post the first one here today and let you get started on this Beatitudes series we've been in. I've been enjoying this. This is Jesus' introduction to his Sermon on the Mount, and some important phrases here that he uses, and so we've been kind of studying them topically, and so I'm trying to get you the first one out here today. I've been a bit busy with some baseball and now softball, but without further ado, here is the beginning of our Beatitudes series.
Let's take our Bibles and go to Matthew chapter 5. Matthew chapter 5. We are going to take some time over the next 8 weeks to study the Beatitudes. It's commonly called the Beatitudes. Jesus didn't call it the Beatitudes. We've called it the Beatitudes based on the Greek word and how it's transliterated. So we call it the Beatitudes, and for other reasons. But the Beatitudes were the first 12 verses of Jesus' most famous sermon, the Sermon on the Mount. And what catches my attention is thinking about this being Jesus' introduction. I had to take a few speech classes. Didn't care much for them early on because getting in front of people was the scariest thing you could think of. And so I tried to get out of it. I remember one time I was a freshman in college, and it wasn't technically a speech class, but we had to get up in front of, I didn't realize it was an upperclassman class, and I took it. And it was child evangelism, and you had to teach a song. I've told some of you this if you're in my class all the time, but I had to teach a song, and I had to teach a memory verse. And I'm going to have all these upperclassmen, and I picked a song called Lord, I Need You. Now, don't sing it out loud, but if you sing it in your head, that song, Lord, I Need You, I'm not going to sing it for you either, okay? But if you start doing it, it gets really high. And I didn't think about that. So I'm up there, I'm a freshman in college, already nervous, and I've got all of these upperclassmen in there, and I'm trying to lead them. And the worst thing is the teacher, right before I got up there, and I was first one, said, hey, you got to treat the class like they're little kids. So I'm in there with these 18, 19, 20, 21-year-olds, and I'm like, all right, little guys, here we go. Let's sing Lord, I Need You. I was in a full sweat. I mean, full sweat. I was so nervous about that, and it actually went bad. I stopped. I couldn't hit the high note. I just stopped. I'm like, I'm sorry. I didn't care what grade I got. Just get me through that class. That was one type of class. But speech, one of the things they teach you in the speech class, and even in the preparing of sermons when you're preaching, I don't always do it in like a teaching setting, but your introduction is extremely important. You want to capture their attention in the introduction. And a lot of times you want to open a loop, in a sense, when you're teaching an introduction, and you want to create a curiosity in the people listening. You want them to, when I say open a loop, you want to create this curiosity that the answer is not coming yet, but they're just like, well, what is it? And then you move on. A lot of times at the end of a introduction, you're asking kind of a question to get to stir the thinking a little bit. So there's different principles that you learn in speech. And so that fascinated me because the Sermon on the Mount was Jesus, who's perfect, who's God, giving his greatest sermon. Well, how does he start it out? Now, he didn't take any speech classes. He didn't need to. He's created this world. He's pretty good at what he does. But because he's God, I wanted to see, and I wanted to study one time, what is his introduction? And his introduction was what we call the Beatitudes. And when I have studied these and am studying through them again, matter of fact, this morning I just found a book online that I really want to read, and I was like, I wish I had it before this first week, but I'm going to go through and read it, and so there may be some more added material that I want to put into this series, but I wanted to just stop and see, where did Jesus start this most famous sermon that he ever preached? And so let's just read through it, and we're going to read through it first. We're going to deal with the very first one. We're going to deal one each week, and I think there's about 8 of them, and so we should take us into throughout the entire series. But let's just for a second, just pause. Let's seem as if we're rewinding back 2,000 years ago. We're sitting on this mountainside, and you get to hear Jesus open up. If you've watched The Chosen, if you like The Chosen, if you don't like it, you're one of those that likes to go against it on social media, I apologize, but I like it, okay? And in the last season, I believe, is when Jesus was working on this Sermon on the Mount, and then he delivered it. And it was actually a powerful moment when we watched that. A little bit somewhat emotional when I watched that, just because you think about Jesus delivering this message and how passionate he was. So I believe he was passionate when he delivered this. But let's just read it together. We'll start with what it says in verses 1 and 2 to kind of open it up. And then we'll read them together. And then we'll come back to verse 3 and cover that one today. But imagine yourself with Jesus 2,000 years ago. It says, "And seeing the multitudes, he, Jesus, went up into a mountain. And when he was set, his disciples came unto him. And he opened his mouth and taught them, saying," and his very first word, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Now, you know I can't get through the entire thing without stopping, all right? My bad. I should be able to do that, but I can't, because I want to say something. When he said that word blessed to start, okay, when he said the word blessed to start, it would have, like to you guys, you all just sat there and were like, okay, finish reading this thing, all right? I know, maybe I didn't read your mind, but maybe. But they, when they heard the word blessed in their Greek language, it would have blew their mind, because it's not a word you use to talk about humans. This is the word that they would use in the Greek that deals with like a divine type of joy. So he's starting out his sermon saying divine joy, divine happiness, referring to them. And he's using that Greek word. That would have just immediately got them thinking, what? He's talking to us? So he says, blessed. That word itself is a good introduction, because it would have caught their attention. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are they which do hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. Blessed are they which are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are ye, when men shall revile you and persecute you, and say all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake. Rejoice and be exceeding glad, for great is your reward in heaven. For so persecuted they the prophets which were before you. And so this was the introduction to his sermon. There's a lot of good technical things. He's repeating the word blessed. He's building on each one of them. But he's beginning this Sermon on the Mount. The Sermon on the Mount, which we won't go through the entire thing, was the theme of the entire message was God was dealing with the internal righteousness that would produce an external righteousness. So that's what if you study the entirety of this sermon, he's saying, listen, there needs to be an internal change in your heart that will affect your external, as opposed to trying to just clean up the external, but your internal heart is wicked. Who does that describe in the New Testament times? Do you remember? The Pharisees, who he was attacking throughout this entire sermon. I shouldn't say attacking, but I mean who he was referencing and really upsetting in his entire sermon. Because the Pharisees were all about look perfect on the outside, but boy, they were sinful on the inside. And Jesus is flipping everything and saying to them, hey, I want to work on the heart. Not that the external is not important, but an external without the internal is fake and hypocrisy. He's saying we need to start at the heart, and that will overflow. That will come out. And so, the Beatitudes, it's not a series of things to do, but these Beatitudes that we're going to study, it's a challenge of our attitude and the way that we think. Because if you change the way you think, you change the way you perform. It starts on the internal. And so a child of God, as children of God, we should be thinking different than those of this world. And so we've got this word blessed that comes up over and over again. It's, again, what I said, it's a divine joy. It's perfect happiness. And it's perfect happiness that's not dependent upon circumstances. Everybody's happy when things are going great. I mean, when the bills are paid, as you hear all this all the time, but I mean, when the bills are paid, when the kids are behaving, I mean, and everything's going well, work's great, your family and friends are all getting along, of course you feel happy. But blessed he's saying is this: even when everything else could be going wrong, there's an internal joy and peace you have, and it comes from this relationship with Jesus Christ. So he says, blessed are the poor in spirit. The very first one, and as he dives into this, he begins with this idea of the poor in spirit. And so let's just quickly, and I don't think it should take us super long, but let's just quickly look at the first one. What does it mean and what does it not mean? I think I want to start first with what does it not mean, okay? So when he says, blessed are the poor in spirit, let's rule out a few things. Number one, it does not mean that you've got to be poverty-stricken to be spiritual. So it doesn't mean that if you are in here and you are loaded, you got a lot of money, you're not spiritual, all right? So you're safe, Ryan, all right? Zach, you guys are safe with your riches, all right? No, that's not what it's saying. It's not saying that if you have this, that you want to be spiritual, you got to be poverty-stricken. It's not. But some people do this. If you think about it, there are those that deprive themselves of things of this world because they think it makes them spiritual. Now, I want to test you. I would love to quiz you and say, okay, who does that? And see if you get two answers. But it's your first time in my class, some of you, and I don't want to do that to you, all right? But think about a couple of them. One of them we don't see a lot in America. It's more of a Eastern thing. But monks do that, don't they? They deprive themselves of a lot. And in their religion, their mindset is depriving themselves of this makes them spiritual. But that's not the idea of poor in spirit. It's not depriving yourself of anything. So that's wrong. But there's another one that's not just way over there. There's something that's even in Indiana. If you go up north, some of you like to go up north. We bought a dog from up around there. What's that place called? Shenandoah? It's not Shannon. Shipshewana? Who's up and around that area? The Amish. They don't want electricity. They're not going to be worldly and have that electricity. I am so glad I have electricity. My air went out for like one day, and Shell and I, we were down on the couch. I mean, it was hot. And it's out again, by the way, but we got an window air in there now until they get it fixed tomorrow. But, I mean, I am so thankful for electricity. But there are some that deprive themselves of those things, thinking that would make them worldly, so that they're, and I don't know if they would word it this way, but they are, in a sense, poor of that. They're poverty-stricken of the electricity to make themselves spiritual, but that's not what this is referring to. So it doesn't mean that you have to be poverty-stricken, but it also does not mean that we need to be poor-spirited. So the poor in spirit, or maybe poor-spirited, so meaning, I just got no motivation to do anything. I've got no enthusiasm. I'm just very poor in my spirit. No, that's the opposite of what the Bible teaches. Remember, over in Titus, it tells us to be zealous of good works. That's the opposite word of this. So what does he mean then when he says to be poor in spirit? And this is something that I think I've emphasized lately. Maybe it's on Wednesday nights. I've emphasized it a lot. And the more and more I see this coming up in our country, the more I talk about it. So forgive me when you've heard it. But poor in spirit here, and Jesus talked about it. It's the very first thing he talked about. So maybe as I'm studying the New Testament, it just keeps coming up. But here it is. What is poor in spirit? It's the complete absence of pride. And it's the complete absence of self-reliance. We live in such a prideful society. Man, so full of pride. We have to, and even as, I see it, even as adults, we just finished coaching the boys, and Aaron was with us coaching boys, but I can feel it in my own self, because there's pride that you have, and it's not like pride in the well done of the boys, but I mean, you want to see things happen and it makes you feel good, but then you got to fight off the pride, because pride can creep up even in innocent ways. But then you have people. I don't know. I told this on Wednesday night. I'm like, I see way too many bad things online, But I saw a situation where there's a video of a guy who was mad at his neighbors because their music was loud. So they confronted each other, and pride was spewing, and they were arguing over this. And over loud music, a guy pulls out a gun, and they're arguing, and now no one will back down. Because why won't you back down in that situation? Us guys, now in this room, we're all kind of Maybe we're all a little bit sissies. We're all like, all right, hey, you know what? Let's keep the loud music, you know. But a lot of times what happens in us guys is it's pride now. I can't be the first to back down. You got to back down. Well, now there's 2 dead guys because someone else came out to try to help, and that guy just shot him. 2 dead guys over loud music. And I remember watching that in my office. I should be doing loans, but I saw that in my office. And here's what I thought. And this is genuinely what I thought, because I've been on this thought of pride a lot lately. There's just a lot of pride right there. 2 people are dead, and 1 guy's in prison for the rest of his life because of pride. No one could just say, I'll just back down and de-escalate this situation. Pride, that's all it was. There's a lot of other things we could say. I mean, there's a lot of other factors maybe you could say, but at the heart of it, 2 guys full of pride fighting over music. Just go to bed. Just go to your room. Dead, just like that. Pride just kills. But Jesus talked about it all throughout the New Testament. He said in Luke chapter number 9, verse 23, he said, if any man will come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. He said in James 4:6, he says, but God giveth more grace, wherefore he said, God resisteth the proud. And I talk about this all the time, but if that right there ought to get every one of us in this room to say, I want nothing to do with pride. He says, God resisteth the proud, but giveth grace to the humble. That verse alone, now that verse is repeated like 3 times in the New Testament, that part of it. But that verse alone ought to make every one of us just say, I want nothing to do with pride. If God's resisting, God is stiff-arming pride, and he's giving grace, which God's grace is amazing, to the humble, I'll just choose the humble route. But humbling it's a humbling thing to say, you know what, I'll walk away. It's a humbling thing to say, you know what, I was wrong. It's a humbling thing to get to the point where, like, you know what, they're going to, and a lot of times it's this, right? If I walk away or if I don't say this, then they're going to feel like they won. Who cares? Who cares? Well, they're going to feel like they were right. Who cares? God resisteth the proud. Don't take the path of the pride. It always leads to destruction. But our culture pushes everything self-confidence, self-esteem, self-worth, self-ease on their thing, everything. And I'm not against selfies, okay? So don't think if you post a selfie, I'm against you. I'm okay. You can post selfies. But I'm just saying, but think about our society. Everything is self. And I do think you need self-confidence. When our boys were playing, I wanted them to go out and be confident as they were pitching or confident as they were batting. I didn't want them to go out there thinking, well, I'm going to blow this like their dad is. I'm the most negative person in the world. I thought we were going to lose last night. I'm like, well, we're done. We're going to lose. And they go out and win. See, I have no confidence. But self-confidence, I mean, I get it to an extent, but we live in such a self-world that it's the opposite of how Jesus started this sermon. Because Jesus said, blessed. And that's what really at the heart, we all want that true joy. We want peace and joy. And we want that in spite of the circumstances. And the only way to get that, I think at the beginning, he says, is to be poor in spirit. You don't have to be poor in finances, but you've got to be humble. You've got to be willing to say, hey, I don't have to have the credit. I don't have to have the glory. I don't have to be known. I don't have to win this argument because I just want to be right with God. Humble, humility. Proverbs talks about it a couple times. It says, before honor is humility. You want to be honored. I need to be recognized at work. Well, just keep being humble and keep working hard. I need to be recognized at that church. Well, just keep being humble and keep working hard. Pride, I would challenge you, I don't know how to describe it best in the spot, but I would challenge you to every time you start to have best way I could say was just this weird feeling, like you're struggling with this. Maybe even in a marriage, because what's the Bible say these verses are just popping in my head, but they're not. I'm not being able to grasp them. But there's a verse about pride goeth before contention. So a lot of contention, a lot of fights, even in a marriage. There's pride somewhere. Probably both sides, but there's pride somewhere. So my challenge is whenever you start to feel that frustration or something, stop and say, where is pride in this situation? Is there pride in me in this situation? If so, then we got to say, God, forgive me. I don't want to move forward in this pride. But what's going to happen, though, is those other thoughts are going to come up. Well, but if I back down now, then they are going to stop. That's pride. Stop. But I'm going to be a doormat. Stop. That's pride. All we live for is the audience of one, that's Jesus Christ. That's what we do. So, are there times when you need to take a stand? Yes. I'm not saying be a doormat. There are times when you need to take a stand. I think Jesus took a stand a few times. There's times when Paul was a strong man. But you have to be sensitive to the Spirit that you know I'm moving forward in pride now, not with the backing of the Holy Spirit. And we can get there. So, blessed are the poor in spirit. It means that an absence of pride, an absence of self-reliance. I'm not relying on myself. I'm relying on the Spirit of God to help me with this. But then it also means to acknowledge my utter helplessness before God. It's a spiritual poverty, not a material poverty. It's a spiritual poverty of a spiritual need. It's to be solely dependent upon God to meet our needs. And I think Jesus starts here. We've talked about this quite often. Whenever we've referred to Galatians chapter number 6 or chapter 5, we talk about this. But this is to be the Christian life. The Christian life is not to be, I'm going to do this. You know what? I'm going to conquer this sin. No, you're not. Sin's going to conquer you every time. Well, then what do? You rely upon the Holy Spirit. Your utter dependence, not upon yourself. You need to be utterly dependent upon God. Saying, God, I need you in this. That's the gospel to the Christian. It's trusting in Him to help us overcome. We are helpless before God. We have our spiritual poverty. And Brad, in my internal is just so rotten. If I were to let him go, just so rotten. I need a constant check of the Holy Spirit. A constant check of the Bible. And every once in a while, a constant check of my wife to say, hey, that's wrong. That's the flesh. That helps too. God gives us a built-in helper in our spouse, and they can sometimes sense before we even sense what's going on. I've told where did I tell this? Was it Sunday school? But the Chavezes cracked me up because, and I still think of this, I'll say it again for those who didn't hear, but as Sarah used to always, Chris would say, he'd say it in front of a sermon, but he'd say, sometimes I can get a little bit prideful. And he says, when we're in a public setting and I start to get a little prideful, his wife, Sarah, starts going like this. And I remember one time hearing her do this, and I'm thinking, what is she doing? And he laughed, and he told me afterwards, he goes, when she starts smelling pride on me, she starts sniffing like that. And I'm like, well, man, I was going to give her a Kleenex. You must have been really full of pride or something. But your spouse sometimes, can sense, hey, where are we going right here? Because they're with you. But you know what that brings up? More pride if we don't want to listen. Well, who are you to tell me what to do? You do this and you do this. Oh, there's a good prideful comeback. Because all we do is now pivot it to try to point all of your faults out. Pride. So pride's everywhere. So we need to, one, not have the pride like we discussed, but two, realize we are helpless before God. We need to be dependent upon God to meet our needs. It's how we were saved. If you think about it, when we were saved, we had to become poor in spirit. We had to get to the point where we realized, I can't do this for myself. I can't get myself to heaven. We became dependent upon God for salvation. That's the same attitude we need to have in the Christian life. It's Christ, I need you to help me through this. Just like that song when I opened up this whole lesson. I tried to sing it to those adults saying, all right, let's sing Lord, I Need You. It's a beautiful song, but don't ever do it in front of upperclassmen, all right? But it's a beautiful song that just says, Lord, I need you. When the winds are blowing strong, Lord, I need you. And I don't remember the rest of it now, but he's just constantly saying, God, I need you. And that's the spirit of this word, poor in spirit. It's saying, God, I realize I can't do it. I can't do it. It's not a defeated, like when we were down, we were down yesterday and we were struggling as a team, I was like, man, we can't do it. Now I was just being pessimistic. This isn't being pessimistic. This is saying, man, God, I don't have the power, but I'm trusting you. That's faith. And so that's the attitude we need to have. We could give some different illustrations of this. We think of Gideon in the Bible. Remember, God kept getting Gideon down. He got him all the way down to how many? 300, didn't he? God said 300 would be about right. Well, we're going up against 132,000. Yeah, but I like that 300 number. Well, what was God doing? He was making him poor in spirit. He was emptying every bit of pride he could have had. Because I think if he'd have won, this is just me guessing, but if he'd have won with whatever he would have had originally, 20,000 or so, he would have been like, I'm a pretty good commander. I mean, I led 20,000. When you get down to 300, it's like, okay, this isn't going to happen. We are poor. We are helpless. And now God can work. And that's where we need to be as a Christian. We need to we need to realize it's not about us. So we need to ask God, so how do I become poor in spirit? Well, number one, we've got to deal with the pride constantly. It's got to be a constant daily thing, dealing with the pride. But number two, we just got to be asking God, God, I need you. Right here, I need you. You got to work. And then what's the promise? When we're there, blessed, there's a joy in that because we will be blessed or blessed. There's that divine joy. But then he says, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. We could probably go deeper into this, but the basic thought in this is, one, it means this, that we're going to experience. It means that we are going to experience the goodness and the providence of God now in this life. You know, heaven's going to be awesome. I can't wait. I mean, I'm not saying I want to go now, but I mean, if it happens, it happens. I'm not saying anything's going to happen. Don't worry about it. When I say I can't wait to get to heaven, I mean, it's going to be amazing. Like sometimes we think about it, we're like, I don't know what we're going to do. And if you're like to know, you don't like change, like I don't like change. My personality doesn't like change. And so the thought of, okay, what's going to be like in heaven can feel scary, even if you've grown up in church, like, because what's it going to be like? Well, it's going to be perfect, no more sin. Okay, great, but I don't. Where am I going to be going? All these human fears can creep up, but it's actually going to be amazing. But what this verse is talking about, theirs is the kingdom of heaven. He's got the idea of this: you're going to get to experience, in a sense, heaven on earth. Why? Well, because if you're constantly poor in spirit, you've constantly got Christ working through you. You've got the spirit of humility. You're going to experience true happiness, and that's what's going to be when we get to heaven. True happiness, true joy, true peace. And we get to experience that in a limited way when we remove ourselves of pride, when we stay humbled upon Him. He's saying you don't have to wait to experience true happiness. That's why he said blessed. He says that word is important. For theirs is, that's present right now. Christ is the ruler of kingdom, and all the riches of Christ are available to Him. So if you are humble now, he says, the kingdom of heaven is yours. You're going to have it. You can experience a better life in this earth right now, but it starts with being poor in spirit. So what's going to happen is when we get into some of this, some of these words we don't use a lot. What's poor in spirit? Okay, how do I become poor in spirit? I just want you to think this week about that word humble. How can I be humble? What is the humble approach here? And humility. And maybe if you like doing Bible studies, get in and study in the Bible where God talks about humility. And maybe contrast that with what God talks about pride, but study where He talks about humility. Because the first attitude we see this morning in Jesus' opening illustration, his opening message, He's saying, I expect to see an attitude of humility. Total dependence upon Christ, upon Himself, the removal of pride. And if you've ever found yourself in that trap that our society has right now, the trap of self, the trap of pride, I would hope that, I know this is just a Sunday school lesson, that's fine, but I hope that today sometime you would just bow your head and pray and say, God, just deal with any pride in me. And it could get painful. You know, just sometimes when you're dealing with something, even a medical issue, and you have to, it's painful to get the fix. You know, when you have to set an arm or set a broken bone, that's painful, but you get it's painful in order to fix it. And it may be painful if there's some pride built up in you. It's painful the first few times when you have to go to your spouse and say, I'm sorry, and you're like, but they're going to be like, oh, I won this argument, and you feel it. And if you're a competitive person like me, I mean, I don't like to lose anything, maybe even an argument. I don't like to lose it. But the best way sometimes is, every time, is to take the humble path, because God resisteth the proud. So blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Let's pray.